exactly what's the point? This is our second episode, and fortunately enough for us, there's not been any ethical standards complaints. Still time. Still time. But anyway, listen, we'd like to welcome you today. We've got a massively packed discussion that we will look to have as we unpack the inner wranglings of North Lanarkshire and its political frameworks. So today you would notice that we've got the Bellsy Hill bowler back with us, Mr. Jerry Brennan, in a very decent shirt this time. Thank you very much for joining us, Jerry.
Delighted to be here, Greg, and thank you for the invite, obviously.
And on top of that, we've got a wee change in the cast this week, Jerry. We've invited our good friend, the elderly version of Fabio along, indeed. Paul Damasio.
Thank you.
Let's cut to a photograph of Mr. Fabio sitting in the conservatory. Anyway,
resplendent.
Moving on.
Resplendent. So, as we've had the opportunity now to reflect on Thursday's, calamitous election result for the SNP, we are now in the new dawn rising, as Tom Johnston would say. The new Labour government taking power, and already since the weekend we're seeing significant movement for the new Prime Minister. He is here to make big changes, and still no definition of what change actually means yet, but big changes are coming. So I'm going to start with you, Jerry. What do you think about Thursday's election result, and what does change mean to you? What do you think we're going to see change-wise?
So change to me means honesty. I think you've got to be honest. If you're going to make changes, then you need to have a plan coming into the new cycle. You need to know where all of those funds are going to come from to make the changes that are required in the major areas of government, like health and education, social security, all of that kind of thing. And I don't see the plans in place to do that. I mean, there's looking at the Keir Starmer had the fiscal lock arrangement, which pretty much lined him up with Jeremy Hunt, the previous the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And basically what they've got is a fiscal lock, which is indistinguishable actually from the Conservative policy, where they're talking about £18 billion of cuts coming down the line, whether you like it or not. And that's been clarified by the Office of Budget Responsibility. So if you've no money to spend, you're going to have to tax people. And they've said that they're not going to raise any taxes. So where does the money come from? The money's going to come from either printing it through quantitative easing, similar to what they did during the crash in 2008, or they use other vehicles to fund the much needed infrastructural changes that need to take place around schools, hospitals, roads, the major infrastructure that we need to run our society. So they're going to have to create that somewhere. I suspect that we may end up in PFI Mark II, turbocharged PFI Mark II, where the fiscal rules that Labour have set to say that government debt is going to fall in line with GDP, that means that nothing can go on the balance book of public spending.
To interrupt there, because obviously many people who will be watching this, Jerry, PFI turbocharged. Last week you unpacked and uncovered the whole concept of PFI and how Labour introduced that in the Blair days.
Yeah.
And basically, so what you're saying is you think we're going to see another PFI system that is really going to be hit on our children, and debt that is not going to be repaid for so many years. And really, in effect, that's the only way we're going to start to see investment in infrastructure.
I fear so. I mean, Starmer and Labour didn't need to do too much to win this election, to be perfectly honest. The Conservatives absolutely blew it under the disgraceful conduct to the previous Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, and then, well, the one after that, the Liz Truss budget.
Five Prime Ministers.
Five Prime Ministers, but the last two of them probably the worst two in the history of UK politics. So you've got all of that, but the PFI issue, if you're going to have to make sure that you're pegging what you're putting through in public spending, if you're saying that public spending is going to stay low, what you're going to how are you going to invest in the infrastructure that we need? The money's got to come from somewhere. So you either print it, which I don't think they will do, or you go then to the private market and you look to investment companies, hedge fund companies, which they did the last time. And the Labour government under Blair and Brown in the early 2000s absolutely pegged councils up and down the UK not to be able to borrow as they would normally borrow, but to borrow through a PFI structure, which meant that they effectively mortgaged each local authority up and down the UK. We've seen 6 local authorities in England go bankrupt as a result, not just of the PFI arrangements that Labour entered into, but some of the disastrous decisions that they made around equal pay for female workers, and they've had to recoup that money. Glasgow, for example, Glasgow City Council, close to us, have had to almost remortgage some of the real estate that they've got in order to right the political wrongs of the Labour government in the early 2000s, where women, some of them now who have passed away, were not paid equally for the work that they were doing. Took some of them to court. Some of them no longer benefited from that because they're no longer with us. But so I think we're going to end up going back to the future, and it fills me with absolute despair that we're going to end up in that situation, and we need to get some real honesty from.
So bring it back into North Lanarkshire's context, because you unpacked quite a lot in relation to PFI last time we met, Jerry.
I did.
And within that, we looked at the context of North Lanarkshire and PFI's ever crippling debt on North Lanarkshire Council year on year. We start 30, 32, 33, 35, 40 odds.
Yeah.
And that seems to be the ever-ending cycle. Each year we see significant interest added to it. And again, we face that big, massive black hole within North Lanarkshire. The interesting point for me in relation to that discussion is when you look at, Paul, the debt that was created under the last Labour government and equal pay claims and also PFI, do you think there's a chance now that potentially the new Labour government, with Jerry's, I would say, realistic expectation of how Labour is going to perform over the course? Do you think that we're going to see Labour remove PFI debt to local authorities? Because up and down the land, we're seeing that a number of local authorities, especially more so in England, everybody's brinkering on the sort of precipice of bankruptcy.
Yep.
Do you think that we're going to see Labour come in and basically wield the magic torch for everybody to say that, look, we're going to clear that debt and we're going to settle these equal pay claims in Scotland in particular?
Well, it seems unlikely. As much as Jerry's alluded to, they're shouting about change, shouting from the rooftops about bringing change. They're still sticking to the same fiscal, frameworks. To put it in context, in North Lanarkshire, I think, Jerry, in the previous podcast, you alluded to the fact how much we're talking. We're talking North Lanarkshire at tens of millions every year. Out 40 million a year just in North Lanarkshire. So you're talking, during the last Labour government in the noughties, instead of ladling some of the debt with the government, they've just moved some of that debt and swept it under the carpet and and ladled local authorities with that debt. I mean, it would be wonderful to think that Labour would do something about that on their return to power and reverse it through some mechanism with the companies who were awarded those windfalls, shall we say. And not to forget the fact, of course, I think you alluded to this last week as well, Jerry, in the podcast, as a council, we're also ladled with all the extra bills that incurs through the facility management companies who manage.
So you're referencing maintenance debt, etc.
The maintenance debt. So, in some cases we could be paying 10 times as much as what we should be as a council.
Yeah.
Because we've got no choice. We're tied into those PFI agreements.
I found that interesting, that Starmer's approach on this, because ultimately all he did through that election was make sure no gaffes.
The Ming Vaz strategy, that was it. Don't drop it.
Exactly. So nobody go out there and say anything controversial or do anything controversial that could potentially change the electorate's opinion. So quite an effective strategy, because when you look at Scotland, and especially when you look at us in North Lanarkshire, it's the first time in a long time we are competing the end. So within that, I thought it was a clever tactic. On the weekend, I seen that one of his first tasks was to get around the sort of devolved nations and get his photograph taken with the First Minister or whoever it is of the devolved government and have that picture. And there was an interesting picture in Scotland behind John Swinney at Butte House. And again, my concern in seeing images like that. Now, I get that a lot of people will be quite sceptical of this. However, I'm not here to be biased. I'm not giving an opinion. I might be right, I might be wrong. But the position here is, does it look like that image is basically an image or a propaganda image, that there's going to be a new relationship in Scotland and it's going to be about SNP now trying to cling on somehow to power, because ultimately they were the political party for constitutional change, and it now looks like we're bound to our masters.
Well, there's two ways to look at that. You could look at it from the perspectives of, okay, just say Keir Starmer's been really sincere and genuine, and he wants to re-establish the relationships that potentially existed prior to 2010, where Labour were, for most of the period of the Parliament beginning, were in power in Edinburgh and they were in power in London. So there was that relationship. I think when the SNP took over in 2007 and then the Tories in 2010, there's obviously Conservative and Unionist Party versus Scottish Independence. So you've got that clash, and as the rise of independence comes more to the fore, the Conservatives have got to look as if they're the government. They're the government of the Union, and they're going to quash the rebel SNP who want this divisive nationalist separatist approach. So I think it's quite clever of Keir Starmer to come up and, even on the face of it, look as if an olive branch is there to reopen the relationship and have it a wee bit more open. But behind that, I absolutely think there is a strategy that they are looking towards, and that's the 2026 strategy. They believe, the Labour Party, quite rightly, I think, believe that they can leave the 2026 Holyrood election as the largest party. Now, it's unlikely that they'll have a majority the way the SNP had in 2011. And I think it's going to be impossible for them to have a coalition of unionists to give them even a majority. I don't think that's possible, but they can remain the largest party. And they want to make sure that if they're the largest party in Edinburgh, they've got that open, frank relationship with London to make sure that the comms are good and that the messages go out and that they're coordinated, because you'll have Labour in charge in London, you'll have Labour in charge in Wales, and you'll have Labour in charge loosely in a coalition in Edinburgh. The danger for Scots in that is that you look at the policies that are employed in London and the policies that are employed in Cardiff, and you look at the differences that exist in Scotland around things like tuition fees and free bus travel for people up to 22, the Scottish Child Payment, all of those things that make Scotland distinct and different. It's going to be really difficult for Labour to hold that line in England and Wales, and they say, well, what the hell, Scotland have got all of this, all the free provision, and we've got zero. So be careful what you vote for in Scotland, because you don't need to look too far down the road to see how things really are.
So this election, and we look at the face it, and all credit to Labour, because
absolutely,
they honestly they managed to dump the stonking majority in Westminster that has not been seen in my lifetime. So again, it's in such a low vote turned out with such a low vote. But in North Lanarkshire, we returned 4 Labour MPs back down the road, 2 of which were elected members who were our colleagues, previous colleagues.
Congratulations to them.
Congratulations to them. Do we think, Paul, that given the experience of those 2 individuals, do you think that we'll see a stronger argument being made in Westminster for a more fair or equal settlement under Barnett consequentials, or do we think that that we might just get lost in the quagmire. I call it the London lifestyle. So do you think they might get lost in the London lifestyle?
Well, given our experience in North Lanarkshire with Labour in recent years, and the decisions that we've seen, and they are decisions, conscious decisions, because when it comes to setting budgets and such like, it's about priorities and what you prioritise. We've seen the Labour group in North Lanarkshire, and these members have been part of that. Look at closing community centres and swimming pools and things like that, which did not have to happen.
Yeah.
Which was clearly evidenced by the fact that they did do a U-turn.
So do you think then, Paul, do you think that, given that we've got this new Labour government, we've got individuals who were previously involved, they are workings of North Lanarkshire Council, do you think that potentially then we should see a stronger argument coming for the individuals for a better settlement so that we can overturn decisions like school transport, we can overturn lack of funding for ACC, for talking say that's your integrated community, so all your community facilities.
We need to see them fighting for a fairer settlement for Scotland. That's what we need. We need a fairer settlement from Scotland, from the Westminster government, which the the Labour group, and the Labour group in North Lanarkshire and Scotland wide have argued from Holyrood, and they then have obviously the SNP who argue that the settlement from Westminster it needs to be there. So we're now in a situation where the ball's in Labour's court. They just need to provide a good settlement for Scotland, and that money will trickle down to local authorities.
The now Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, who I mentioned this last week, not last week, 2 weeks ago, when he was the Shadow Health Secretary, he spoke about the situation in Wales and how Labour in Wales were cash-strapped, and they were cash-strapped because all financial roads lead to London, they lead to Westminster. So now Labour are in charge of those purse strings. There's absolutely no excuses whatsoever for there to be any dubiety about where those funding roads lead to. They lead to London, and the current Health Secretary has said that. There's one thing that I did want to just come back on, and you mentioned about a kind of landslide victory, maybe one that you haven't seen in your lifetime or for a while. I'm going to mention James O'Brien again. I listen to James O'Brien a lot, right? But he made a really clever. He made a really clever kind of description of this so-called landslide victory. A landslide victory where, in percentage terms, Labour's vote share hasn't really gone up, right? But their seats and the majority that they have in the Parliament is huge.
They know how to play. They know how to play the electoral system. That's correct.
Absolutely. Yeah. But he described it in terms of a ship.
Yeah.
So you've got this big, massive ship with a big, massive deck with all these Labour MPs on it. And normally for a big ship, the keel of the ship that's underneath it to keep it steady is deep, because you've got this massive weight on the top of it. Because the percentage share hasn't increased, but you've got the numbers, he described it to a boat that's like a flat bottom boat that's going to be bobbing and weaving, because the it's not really a landslide. And in Scottish terms, I looked at the figures the other day. I think Labour got 36% of the Scottish vote, and the SNP got 29.9%, right? If you looked at that in proportional terms, Labour should have had maybe 21 seats, and instead did like 37 or 38. Yeah. The SNP ended up with 9 when they should have had 15. So the swing required to swing it back. Imagine that boat. Imagine the boat going like.
That's an interesting point you make, because the last time round the SNP ended up with, was it 38 MPs? 39 MPs. And that was not deemed as a mandate
It was in the 40s.
Was it? That's what I thought.
It was 46 or 47. They were.
No, that was the previous one. That was the previous election.
Was that in the 2017?
2017.
Right. Okay.
So again, if it was 39 coming that last election for this one, there was no deemed as a mandate for the constitutional question.
Yeah.
So again, now we're in a position where Labour won how many?
37. Is that 37 or 38?
37. So we're in a position where it's lesser than the last time around for the SNP, but that now means, according to Labour, that the constitutional question has been addressed.
Absolutely.
That's us. There is a glaring hypocrisy here in relation to how Labour's approaching that subject matter, Paul. And what's your thoughts?
Well, first of all, just if you don't mind going back, when it comes to the landslide you were discussing, I mean, it's pretty clear that the landslide came about due to the absolute mess that the Tories and SNP have been in for the past 2 years. But yeah, come back to your question, Greg.
Let me rephrase it. We've got the Labour group, or the Labour Party, the Labour Party saying that now that they have their 37 elected MPs, that is now a mandate for them to put the constitutional question. Right? But do you think, in relation to the people of Scotland, do you think that's going to be acceptable, considering polling is still showing independent support roughly about 49-50%?
Exactly. And, you know, the reason the SNP have lost Scotland, you know, is that's certainly lost those, a number of those, certainly, not all of those, who are pro-independence, is because they haven't pushed forward that mandate. That, you know, that they weren't forceful enough. They accepted no.
Yeah.
And we now have a situation where Labour have come in and are...
Let's just say, I want to break this down into really what this means to North Lanarkshire, how this is going to look to North Lanarkshire. But I think I'm going to do that a wee bit later in another subject matter that we're going to discuss. It would be remiss of me at this time not to actually look in depth at the SNP. And I seen Mary Black's tweet, a catastrophic failure in terms of the general election result. Mm-hmm. Now, I do want to look at the SNP, and I want to look at them in an unbiased sort of position, and if that's all right, I get that.
Greg, that is what we are all about.
Yeah, they're former members of the SNP. But let's look at this politically. Let's look at it.
Yep. Where
do you think it went? Well, God, I'm not even going to ask that question because we could go all the way back. But the position in relation to this general election, John Swinney was elected First Minister and leader of the SNP how many weeks into the general election campaign? It was a couple of weeks.
In fairness to the guy, he didn't have a lot of time.
And we had a conversation last time you were here when we said about John Swinney effect, the Swinney Mounds or the Swinney Swing or whatever it was called. And basically, whether John Swinney was the right man to do it. Obviously, the position here is the strategy, the tactics, everything else that get presented by the SNP in this general election was nowhere near what was required. Do we think that they basically scored their own goal by not putting Stephen Flynn out to face, be the front face of this campaign? Because when you think about it, Holyrood and Westminster are completely separate entities, and they allowed the SNP for it to come down to boats, camper vans, big blue tents outside houses.
I don't think they had a choice, actually, right? Because Swinney wasn't standing, right?
Yeah.
So Swinney had nothing to lose and nothing to gain.
Uh-huh.
If they put Flynn front and centre and he loses, then it's catastrophic. Do you know what I mean? So
catastrophic.
Nuclear. So they go from a really, really bad position to like a horrible position. So I think it was probably wise. I mean, look what happened to Douglas Ross. Douglas Ross, you would have thought would have been a shoo-in in his seat, and he lost. So he's now resigned his position as the head of the Conservative group at Holyrood, and he's now lost his seat at Westminster. So within a heartbeat, you can be out the game, and that could have been Flynn.
Yeah.
But that's I think they did the right thing. Just going back to the point that you were making, the substantive point about why it's been so catastrophically horrendous for the SNP. I think the strategy that they adopted, probably since 2015, when they got comfortable in power, right, was they became part of the British system, and that was exactly what, in my opinion, the UK Parliament had hoped would happen. So they get people entrapped by power. They get them enjoying the lavish lifestyle in London, having staff at your beck and call in your constituency and all the rest of it. And I think that is a really dangerous aspect of government in general. I mean, it exists within the Holyrood system as well. I'm not saying that it doesn't, but I think when they managed to capture the SNP in the British system, rather than the SNP saying, nah, we're not going to do that. We're going to be different from the moment we come down here because...
Or should we even... should we
well, that's another question.
Because again, I think that again, if you look at the SNP's performance in there, I wouldn't say that one of the biggest things, and I'm going to come on to it in a wee second. Funnily enough, I had the opportunity to jump out onto your neck of the woods this week, Jerry. I was in sunny Bellshill Main Street, and I had the opportunity to speak to a few folk.
Always shines in
Bellshill. Is always shining in Bellshill. But I had the opportunity to speak to a few folk and ask them their points and their questions in relation to the general election. I'm going to cut to that now. Did you vote in the general election?
I did, aye.
Can you tell us why you voted?
The SNP.
SNP. Do you think there's going to be any significant changes with Labour this time round for the general election?
No, not really. It'll just be much the same as what it is.
Do you think we'll see a significant investment in the local authority?
No.
No. And on another note, in the council, we obviously present motions and we argue the case for our constituents. Do you know anything about that?
Not really, no.
Biggest concern in relation to Labour?
Well, my biggest concern was when they were trying to shut all the local swimming pools and sports centres and libraries. That I wasn't too happy about.
How did that affect you and your family?
Well, we use it quite a lot, the facilities, you know.
So can you tell me what you think about the general election result? Do you think Labour's going to change anything?
Definitely not.
And in Bellshill, do you think you're going to see any significant
Nothing.
change?
There's not going to be any changes. What have they got for the kids these days? They've got absolutely nothing. Shut down community centres, You know, they're needing more for everybody.
And within the council, do you understand that it's a Labour administration within the council? Do you know how key decisions are made at council? There's going to be any change?
Definitely no, because they're all liars.
Will Labour win in the UK general election? Do you think there's going to be any change coming to Bellshill?
Well, we would need to wait to the regional elections to get rid of the SNP.
And is that what you think? You think they need to get rid of the SNP to make the change that's needed?
Up here it is, aye.
Alright. And in relation to the local council, you'll be aware Labour's running that local council. Do you think they're doing a good job in that?
Well, I think so, aye.
And do you understand how motions work in the council?
No, not about that bothered with that.
Yeah. So I need to put out a disclaimer there. You would have seen one of the interviews was of my feet, Jerry, one of the individuals that asked not to be put on camera. So I respected their wishes. Interesting.
It's nice to see that you're still going to the charity shops for your footwear.
I can't help it, Jerry.
Excellent.
I'm a dedicated follower of fashion. So as I said, in that I thought it was interesting that, in fact, I should state as well, I actually interviewed about 10 or 15 people and obviously only filmed 3 for this podcast. Point being, it was still very, very strong support for the SNP in Bellshill, although the final gentleman was obviously a very ardent Labour supporter, and that's absolutely great. But still an overarching feeling of independence and SNP support. When I was speaking to people, they didn't want to come on camera. However, what they did say is they're completely let down by the SNP. They've seen absolutely nothing that they've managed to sort of pin a hat to and say, that's my party, I'll go out there and I'll vote. There was a complete apathy in general opinion. Paul, do you think that this is an ongoing, this general election? What do you think of the sort of opinions being expressed there?
Well, it's pretty clear none of them were anticipating, whether they voted SNP, Labour, whatever, were anticipating much change in the way of change.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot of apathy out there, and in fact, I mean, during this election, personally, I lost count of the amount of people. I've never heard as many people say that they didn't think that anybody on the ballot papers represented them, and didn't know how they were going to vote because they felt the same way. They didn't expect change from any of these parties. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, individuals on there.
Very strong words. They're all liars.
Yeah.
Very strong words.
Absolutely, and even the Labour gentleman at the end wasn't
We're assuming he was a Labour gentleman. We don't know that, but he certainly
he was supportive of the Labour administration in North Lanarkshire. He wasn't anticipating any change in Scotland, as he said, until
Scottish Parliament elections.
So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of apathy out there, a lot of anger. I think from.
What do you think the anger stems from in North Lanarkshire? What do you think it reverts back to? Paul?
I mean, it's all parties, and what have the Tories done for Scotland?
Let's take it away from Scotland. Let's actually start to focus in North Lanarkshire again. So again, but other than Labour being in power for goodness of dawn of time in North Lanarkshire, we're seeing year on year significant cuts. The problem Labour administration, in my opinion, is now they've nowhere to hide. They can't blame anybody anymore. Because ultimately they've got to say the Scottish government's cutting more funding, but ultimately it's coming from the UK government.
Yeah, I mean, you only need to look back to Labour's record from 99 till 2007. So the history of that, an investment, isn't really government investment, it's private investment, it's PFI, it's debt. I won't go back to that again, but you're looking at a set of circumstances where you knew that there was one of the biggest things that we deal with as councillors. We're not here as councillors, we're here as members of the public, but as councillors, my casework is mostly about housing, because there's a chronic shortage of housing. The Chief Officer for Housing Services has indicated that there's 14,000 people on our housing list in North Lanarkshire.
At the same time, we're getting rid of all the high-rise flats.
We're getting rid of that, but under the Labour administration the last time, we didn't have a focus on building social housing. We kept the right to buy in place under the Labour administration. That was only abolished in 2015, when we'd already lost 500,000 council houses. So we know there's a shortage of housing in Scotland. Labour at that point in time should have been building.
I think we're jumping way off subject, because we're doing it a separate subject. So the time left back a bit.
But you can't disentangle
No,
that.
listen,
It's
I'm
all about
only
funding.
disentangling it, but the point that I'm about to make is we'll come on to different other subjects as the weeks progress. In housing, let's make a commitment that we'll get to housing, we'll get to housing in detail, we'll unpack that properly. Just to finish up then on the general election, we've seen a significant rise of reform. And in an area you're familiar with, Paul, the Airdrie, third place, they finished.
Yeah.
That must be concerning. And again, that isn't any disrespect to anybody at all that voted reform, but the point here is, if you think about it, in the conversation you had a bit there about how people digest their news now, how they're digesting their media, and mainstream media is no longer trusted anymore, funnily enough. Do you think that reform rise is coincidence to how people are currently digesting their media? And is it down to God, I hate to say it, the sort of leadership style of Farage and how he's played this?
I mean, it could well be. I'm no expert in social media, I have to admit, but I think it's all part of the wider discussion, in terms of how SNP have governed in Scotland, how the Tories have governed down south, and the mess that they've made of things in the last few years. As I alluded to earlier, a lot of people have found themselves politically homeless. But when it comes to reform, that's particularly concerning, because look at the mess the Tories have made of the UK as a whole. Last thing that the UK as a whole, or Scotland, needs is a more right-wing party getting its hands on any sort of power. But I think that the rise in the reform, as I said, is basically down to, in my opinion, just the mess that the UK and Scottish governments have made. When you look at the SNP Scottish government over the last 2 or 3 years, they've focused, the leadership, the SNP have focused on self-indulgent minority politics and policies, and they've even lost, as well as the electorate, they've even lost their own members.
That takes
over the course of the last 2 or 3 years.
The next point that I'm going to make, Paul, because really, Jerry, question is how does the SNP come back for this dismal defeat? And again, like Paul says, if they've stopped listening to the electorate, how do they rebuild trust?
I think what happened with the gender reform bill opened up a fissure within the party that I don't think is ever going to be. That's maybe a wee bit too hysterical that it'll never be repaired, but I don't see it being repaired in the short term. The fissure, I think, that's been opened up by the GRR, that split some members down the line. Some of them, I think it was about 9 of them, voted against the whip in that. So that was the first real evidence of a break within the party itself. And I think the SNP finds itself in a position now where, particularly among the younger cohort of SNP members, is that many of them will be, this is my own personal perspective on it, I think many of them will go green.
Yeah.
And I think what will be left will be a more traditional SNP group of members and voters who are probably more aligned with the previous regime that existed under Salmond, where it was about competent government, it was about bread and butter. That's about bread and butter politics. Get your schools running properly, take care of your NHS waiting lists, make sure your roads have not got potholes in it. Understand that if you need to get a dentist, you get a dentist. Never mind the identity politics
It's not just identity politics, it's populist, but listen, we're going to talk about this all day long. I'm sure we could listen another 2 hours. Very vigilant of time here, because there is other subject matters that we want to go into. But again, just to sort of cap off then in relation to this poll, that the SNP, do we think that this will ultimately impact the SNP in North Lanarkshire? Do you think that, especially the North Lanarkshire SNP group, that come the next elections, this is going to trickle down? We're going to see Scottish Parliament elections, SNP take a hammer, and then come the council elections, the SNP group North Lanarkshire just becoming irrelevant.
There's certainly the possibility for that to happen, but if I could just very quickly come back in on what we were discussing there very briefly, I think that the issue with the SNP now is they're no longer a broad church. That's the danger that they're in, and that may have an impact when it comes to the Holyrood elections, because they're disillusioning voters, and I mean, we can see, as much as I think there's only a 6-point gap, I think, at the Westminster election between the SNP and Labour. Labour are now in power in Westminster. They wield more authority. We'll see what they come up with over the next couple of years and how that affects Scotland. But if they do manage to make a half-decent job of it, then given the way the SNP have went the last couple of years, it could be very difficult for the SNP to recover when it comes to local elections and Scottish.
And on that note, then I think we draw a line under this subject matter and we kind of move on. We need to move on. I'm sorry, because we have we have to spend
He always shuts me up, doesn't he? That's my...
And I think that, again, in fairness to that one person watching, potentially good one, but that basically is we've overegged the pudding in relation to the general election result. Listen, it'll not be the last time we have an opportunity to talk about what this result means, in particular what it means in North Lanarkshire. So on that note, and on that very eloquent and articulate sort of round-up there, Paul, for you, it's about who do we vote for? So in North Lanarkshire, what we've got is, and I need to put a disclaimer out right now, because I'm sure there'll be certain individuals watching this looking and hoping that we make comment as elected members. We are not acting as elected members. We are actually as residents in North Lanarkshire.
Indeed.
We have an opinion, and it just so happens that our job involves politics.
Indeed.
So we know what we bit of the inside aspects are, how politics works, how the council works, and how sort of governments to a certain degree work as well. So that leads me nicely on to the next subject matter that I wanted to discuss today, council motions. Now, again, council motions are there, Jerry, to present ideas on how to make things better for our constituents and allow for the authority to make changes and adapt and all these other fantastic things in which motions are, in theory, meant to deliver. Now, Paul and I, we started our political careers together back in 2017. It's been a long time, buddy, a long time. But basically, and I'm not going into the political generation aspects, and hopefully that's not dog ears, Jerry, that again, if you look at where we are in those 7 years, how many motions would you say we've collectively put forward to you now? Because we do seem to be a bit of a double whack when it comes to nations.
I mean, you're probably talking, 40, 50.
Within 7 years of the motions that we've submitted. So, yeah, up very high figures.
I would be in the 20s, and I'm sure you'd be some.
Well, here's a bit.
I still can't get the double height. I'm trying to figure out what one's Fran and what one's Anna.
Listen, I'm just happy to be in this man's shadow. That's what it is. So again, like say, I've got to be honest here. How many of them have been successful? Because when you think about the motions that have been kind of submitted, even if we go back to the start of this term, we presented a motion about disability adaptations in play parts to make sure that play parts are wheelchair friendly. How many amendments did we have come in against that? There was significant Labour amendment against it. Kibosh this, we already do enough. Yeah. And then there was another motion about a community energy company when the spike at energy prices was rising. And why are we not exploring the concept about a community energy company within North Lanarkshire? Again, slapped down. It's not for a local authority to save its residents money on fuel costs. Now again, this I wouldn't say this is rocket science. I would say it's listening to the electorate, listening to your constituents, trying to come up with a solution and look at the broader perspective across the authority rather than just a simple water issue. So really, in effect, where does this leave us in relation to emotions?
See, before we go on to talk about the motion element of it, it's maybe helpful, and I know David tried to do this last time round, just to explain what a motion is. A motion is an idea. I mean, it's an idea. It's a proposal put forward by councillors to improve the life, health and well-being of the constituents. That's what we're elected to do. And that could be to change council policy, or it could be to change standing orders, for example. And all that is all standing orders is the rules around how council operates, the procedural rules. So a motion is an idea, and an amendment to that is simply that. It's something different to the motion that's put forward. And having you guys are obviously older than me and more seasoned than me in your political journey. I'm a newbie, so to speak, only having been there for 2 years, but I have been surprised at the number of motions that are deemed not to be competent, that are proposed by elected members and which come back from the provost, or that come back from Legal and Democratic as being I
Not
think
competent.
it's been not competent.
Paul, how, right, so there's a couple of things I want to unpack in your comments, Jerry, right? Rules and procedural rules are in the submission of motions, but also I think that that's a really important point for people because they want to know, people want to know this, how motions are scored. So again, for a deem a motion competent, and we added in addition to that as well, costed. Yeah. So an idea, we need to cost that idea to turn around and say, now the argument could come forward saying that that's good governance, it's governance that happens in the Scottish Government, that's the way things are brought forward by opposition parties. But really in effect, how do you know the cost of something until you try it? How do you know that's going to have that? But when you think about the sort of social investment in relation to that, the return on that social investment. So again, when it comes to, and I'm trying to get my thought process on this because it is so wide and varied, when the provost gets a motion in, how is that scored? How does he decide whether or not competency of a motion is there? Do you know the process of that, Paul?
Good question.
Give us a good answer.
Give us a good answer.
77 councillors in North Lanarkshire Council. I wonder if anybody could answer that. Other than say it's down to the provost.
Well, I could answer it. Because I have submitted my fair few number of motions over the years and entered into extended dialogue with not only just this provost and other provosts and how they score and what their scoring mechanisms is. Now, this will surprise you that when you receive a motion, there is no benchmarking, there's nothing to base that on. So the provost will look at something on the face of it. Right. He'll pass it to his legal advisors, whoever that is in legal and democratic services, and they'll make comment and recommendation on whether or not that's competent. There is nothing at all. There is no scoring mechanism in there to say that is weighted in such a fashion or that is scored in such a fashion that now makes the motion competent or that now makes the motion not competent. When you get a refusal of a motion, there is no grand explanation as to why that is, but there's no recommendation either to say, by the way, do you know something, the terminology in that motion, there's a couple of wee tweaks to it, see if you do that, that'll make it competent. And they're known their interest to assist you in putting, now this could be the most diligent, most competent, most fantastic idea ever to help the authority, but most importantly help the residents of North Lanarkshire. But yet we're turning that away. Why do you think that would be?
So if I was an absolute cynic, and you know I'm not a cynic, I'm a very positive and very positive individual. I would say as a cynic that it could be viewed upon as a means to ensure that there is no debate on particular issues. It actually closes down debate, in my opinion, and that's my opinion as a member of the public, not as an elected member. Introducing barriers that stop motions going forward and stop debate is not good for democracy. Yeah. Introducing elements like costing, for example, I thought was a really needless approach to be taken to make sure that every motion going forward to North Lanarkshire Council has to be costed, because then you have to engage with officers and then you're asking officers to go and undertake work, potentially work that's needless, to come back with something that could be undertaken, very quickly. Just put the motion through, undertake the work, because that's what officers are paid for. Undertake the work, and then when it comes back, you've got all that information for it, you've properly costed, and then there's another debate to go forward about whether it becomes policy or not. But to add the additionality, I think, is the issue for me. Needless, as far as I'm concerned.
So within that, because again, it's a subject matter that there's so much to unpack in. When you think about motions and amendments coming, amendments kind of similar. That's the opposition putting forward whatever it is to the motion and saying, no, we think that should be done X, Y, and Z. Right? But we're not really allowed in most occasions to be a double negative to turn around and say, no, just cancel all of that. So we need to keep the pretense up. But when you look at the block vote that takes place when a motion, so say you're successful and your motion's accepted. So the minors' motion's the only thing that we can speak about because that's the only successful motion we've had in a while.
What was that about, Greg?
The minor strikes, to recognise the minor strikes. So we kind of spoke about it briefly the last time. But that motion going forward, when that motion goes forward, obviously sometimes that you would have opposition councillors putting forward amendments. Do you think there's a strategy in the chamber, given the fact that the last time we touched upon there is additional enhanced payments to certain individuals within the chamber, that again on the face of it, if I was a cynical man, which I am not, I am merely commenting as a local resident when I look on the face of it, that you have a Conservative leader on getting enhanced payment and convenership, you're getting a deputy provost, Conservative again, enhanced payment, and part of the administration. I think there is another Conservative, by the way, it's got a deputy position in one of the committees. Then we get to independents. There's two independents that have prominent roles, one with a convenership and the other one on an NHS board, I think. And then we have the leader of the opposition. So really, in effect, how can you have true discourse in relation to any motion or amendment, because the historical data dictates that that there's block voting taking place when motions are being put forward as an amendment?
At the quarterly meeting of the full council is generally where opposition councillors will present their motions to try and affect policy, which they were all 77 councillors have been voted in to do. So it's mainly opposition councillors who will present motions, but the Labour, predominantly Labour administration, propped up by, of course, the Tories and their independent partners who, as you alluded to, Greg, are all in paid positions, attempt to block almost everything that opposition councillors put through, even if it makes sense. Amendments for amendment's sake.
I think what Greg's alluding to is the fact that when you introduce paid positions, right, now the local authority has to operate, right? So we understand that committees need conveners and vice conveners, right? And that is there's additional responsibility to be taken on there, right, and recognised. If you're in the majority position, as the Labour group are, there's more than enough individuals in there to undertake that role. So to have that moved outwards towards relationship, towards opposition politicians is,
if you look
strange to me.
If you look at past performances, right, and you look in the chamber, you look at the relationship between the official opposition in relation to the administration, you see whispering taking place, you see all these different other mannerisms take place. And again, this is uncritical votes. A wee while ago, in fact, I'm going to cut to a clip now, Jerry, when we last submitted a motion and we sent the chair, and this is about procedure. The motions for resolution to procedure, we requested that we had a formal structure in place for the Lord Provost to score motions. And that was refused and defeated. And then we had another procedural aspect about having recorded meetings, etc., and making sure that things are being appropriately recorded for transparency. So we'll cut to that clip now, we'll show you that, and then we'll come back and we'll talk in relation to why we see such chaos in regards to the chamber and that meeting a full council, because really in effect if we made that procedural change, which they didn't capture on until the last minute, then really in effect we probably wouldn't be having this conversation. Perhaps, mate. So cut to that.
Provost, in order to expedite the unrest and to allow people to leave, we have decided to withdraw our motion. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Crichton.
Yeah, thanks, Provost. Again, keep it short and sweet. It's self-explanatory. I think the motion that's there, I suppose it's really about transparency and what I call the dark arts of... Sorry, Provost, I'll wait till it gets quiet, really. Yeah, so the motion really is about the transparency really of motion submission and electorate conference.
Councillor Crichton, you're right, there was a wee bit of noise in the chamber when people were returning there, so I've lost the pace of the meeting as well, so if you excuse me just for 1 second. Going back to item 15, Councillor Brennan. You said that your item was withdrawn.
Yes, Provost.
Item 15. Councillor Crichton, item 16, as a mover of the motion.
Thank you, Provost. How to build up anticipation, eh? Yeah, the motion really speaks for itself, and to try and short-circuit what's there, realistically I just see it about the transparent process of being able to lodge motions, and also for the electorate to see potentially what aspects are brought to the office of Provost for discussion, and how that potentially forms future potential of policy direction within the council. Just to really sum up, because there's no disagreement really on it, is that I think, to be honest, the only pantomime that I can see in here this afternoon is the lack of the SNP contribution towards and demonstrating scrutiny on important roles. Thank you, Provost.
Councillor Brennan.
Just to echo Councillor Crichton's comments, thank you.
Councillor Gallagher.
Thank you. I would please propose that the motion that the amendment that we had for agenda item 15, that now is an amendment to agenda item 16.
Can we clarity on the competency and the
Yes,
ability to do
please,
that?
thank you.
If you just give me a moment.
We've moved on to a different agenda item. The opportunity to come in has passed.
Provost, if Councillor Carricker's original amendment to 15 gets carried forward to 16, I would ask that the Labour Group amendment for 15 also is carried over.
Say that we're trying to establish whether Councillor Carricker's
Point
request to do that
order,
is to be...
Provost, again, apologies. Working on this premise, then we'll be able to go back to agenda item 3 to look at that decision.
No, because that item's subject to the 6-month rule, so you would have to suspend the standing orders to do so.
So it's the previous item, Provost, if
welcome
it's
to move
withdrawn.
that, though. You are welcome to move that.
In fairness, just to make the point, we've moved on to agenda items. We can't go back to agenda items.
Councillor Damasio, I moved the agenda on,
in the building.
and Councillor Carragher has made a point that I am unfamiliar with, hence why I sought the advice of the monitoring officer, who I'm going to ask now to come in.
Thanks, Provost. Yeah, the standing orders do recognise that an amendment could arise on the day, and indeed that could be put to you verbally. And if you require it to be reduced to writing, but there's no need for it to be reduced to writing, it certainly recognises that an amendment could be made that hadn't previously been put to an item. And in this case, as I understand it, it's the amendment from 15 that's being proposed.
So on that basis, Councillor Carragher, you're wishing to move the wording...
Provost, sorry to interrupt you, but there's no motion. How can we be making a decision if there's no motion that's withdrawn?
We're on item 16.
Provost.
Sorry, Councillor Lennon. I'll ask the monitoring officer to say it again. I understood it, and maybe others didn't, but I'll ask him to say it again, and then from his advice, I will give my ruling on that to Councillor Carragher.
Thanks, Provost. So, my understanding, I think, is that we are in item 16, 15, having been withdrawn. It's been indicated by Councillor Carricker that she would wish the amendment that was on the papers for 15 to now be in respect of item 16. That's correct, isn't it?
Yeah, I would like to, the amendment that we suggested for item 15, I would like that now to be the amendment that we are proposing for item 16, because it is in relation to the standing orders, and that is what, in my opinion, that's what item 16 is for, so I believe that it's relative.
And I would agree with that, Provost, on the basis of what the standing orders say, and I'll say it again, they recognise that it's competent for a verbal amendment to be put to you for your determination in terms of competency. If you so decide, then that could be reduced to writing. It doesn't need to be reduced to writing. It can then be a verbal amendment to the item, and in this case, as I understand it, that's item 16. That's my interpretation of the standing orders.
Thanks, Archie. Well, given the wording has already been given to members, I would accept it as competent. Anybody wish to contribute to the debate? Councillor Williams.
Okay. It was just a question. The amendments to standing orders, would they not be more appropriate as an amendment to item 17, which actually reflects the standing orders?
Councillor Williams, I've sought that advice and I'm comfortable with the advice of the Auditing Officer and deemed it's competent. I hear your point, but the decision or ruling has certainly already been made. Anybody else wishing to contribute at this point? Do the movers wish to sum up, starting with Councillor Rota?
Provost, sorry, point of order. I don't believe standing orders is actually mentioned in item 16. So relevance should surely fall into touch.
Councillor McManus, Archie's going to speak to the chamber.
Yeah, the link, Provost, in 16 to standing orders is effectively what the motion is asking Council to agree would require a change to the standing orders. So on that basis, it's competent, in my view, that an amendment, or in this case amendments, that are directed to the standing orders, there's a link.
Councillor Carragher, Councillor Crichton.
Provost, thank you. I'm lost. Are we on 16 with my motion and it's done and finished, or where are we?
16, Councillor Crichton, and I've asked you to sum up as the mover of the motion.
Okay, let's just sum up and say thanks very much, Provost. I appreciate that.
Andrew.
Thank you, Provost. So we have a motion by Councillor Brennan, an amendment by Councillor Carricker, and an amendment by Councillor Rorty. So in the first instance, we'll take a vote between the motion by Councillor Brennan and the amendment by Councillor Carricker.
So, what we saw there was a reaching out of one politician to another, right? And that one politician to another is part of that structure of payment sort of thing. And I'm not suggesting that there's anything untoward going on here. This is about the optics and how it looks to... it looks to other councillors, but it also looks towards the electorate when you have opposition politicians receiving remuneration payments that are decided by the leader of the council.
Yeah. So that's a very important point. I think you need to confirm that again, Jerry, because I ended up in I think it was the other day there, it was on Facebook, and I seen that this podcast was in a discussion with the SNP group in North Lanarkshire. And what it says is, good evening, councillors of PCNL. we weren't acting as councillors of PCNL. But the position was that they were taking that it's the council that gives them their leaders enhanced payment. It's not the leader of the council. So I've asked them to prove us wrong in relation to our assertion.
When I was convener of the Adult Social Work and Care Committee, I was asked by the leader of the council at that time to take on that job. No one else asked me about that. That was purely the remit and responsibility of the leader of the council at that time. Now, my understanding is that that is consistent throughout all of the positions that receive remuneration, and the ultimate responsibility for that lies with the leader to propose them. Council ratify it. It comes to the floor. The council will ratify it if there's enough numbers. So Labour, the Tories, the Independents have the numbers to ratify that. But the decision to make that comes from the leader of the council and the leader of the group.
I hope that the SNP group social media people or manager pick that up, and I don't believe for 1 second they were being disingenuous. I really don't. But I do think that it's a case that they don't even understand how that appointment is made, and it's actually the leader that makes it. Paul?
I think there's something that needs added to that. It's down to the leader of the council to make his choices in terms of those appointments, which is then ratified at full council. So we've previously mentioned the various individuals in the chamber who will support the leader of the council when it comes to votes. However, it's up to those individuals to accept that payment. Whether or not to accept that payment.
It could be returned.
Previous
or a point of principle.
Previous main opposition leaders have refused.
But to take that enhanced payment for the leader?
Yes.
Wow.
So that again.
Well, each to the. I mean, each individual will have to grapple with their conscience. And
as I said again, I think it's interesting because really, in effect, in that brief discussion and reading the discussion with the SNP group, it seemed as if their members weren't aware, and I hope that we kind of shed some light on that. I'm going to move on now, if that's okay, because I think that we've still got a lot to discuss. And perhaps, and again, coming back to it about this leader in North Lanarkshire Council and how decisions are made and how appointments are made, we seem to have, and I'm quoting for the press here, an El Presidente style leadership within North Lanarkshire. We have a man who, in my opinion, shoots for the hip and makes decisions, bypassing 77 elected members, well, no 77, but the opposition in relation to decisions and critical decisions within the council. There's quite a lot of delegated responsibility to officers, etc. And I'll come on to break that up in a wee bit. But again, is this what we want in a functioning democracy? Do we want this Presidente-style leadership? I mean, we're seeing Labour putting out there that they are a progressive party. The allegation's been made to us. How can you be progressive when all you're trying to do is spark debate and da-da-da-da-da?
God forbid.
I would say that's the most progressive thing to do. But again, how do you think this leadership style is going to play out over the next couple of years?
Well, you have to judge based on what you've already seen, right? So this is one of the take people as they are for what they do and what they say, right? So what we know about this current administration and these allegations in press that there is an El Presidente style in place in North Lanarkshire, I think it's quite difficult to disagree with that. And there's a recent example of the closure or the closure of the 39 community facilities that were announced at Policy and Strategy Committee towards the end of last year, and that caused huge ructions within the communities in North Lanarkshire because some of these services that are the real jewels in the crown of local communities. You live in Airdrie, the John Smith Pool, cherished by many people in your constituency. I live in Bellshill, Matt Busby, for example, huge, a huge facility. It's been there almost all of my lifetime, and they're earmarked for closure. What happened to confirm that allegation of presidential style of leadership is that the council committee took the decision to close those facilities. But because there was a by-election taking place around that time when the decision was made, and all of those community groups were up in arms, a decision was made by the leader of North Lanarkshire Council to go live in the press to make a unilateral determination that these facilities were going to stay open. Now, we don't operate in a presidential system, right? There are 77 councillors who bring forward motions.
Yes, it was the right thing to do.
As much as it was the right thing to do, but they bring forward motions, they bring forward amendments to those motions, and you have a debate. And at the end of that debate, 77 councillors will vote on whether they're going to go one way or another. If it's at a committee, there might be less members than that because committees have, the numbers differ, of course. What can never, ever, ever happen is that the leader of the council can come out in the national press and make a determination about the closure or the opening of services that council has already voted on.
Yeah.
And that, to me, was one of the most sinister political acts. In fact, it is the most sinister political act that I've seen in the 2 years that I've been in the chamber. I thought it was absolutely disgraceful conduct.
Yeah. At the same time, you have the leader of the Labour in Scotland speaking to radio stations before councillors even find out.
Yeah. Saying that, I can't remember the exact term that he used, but skulls were cracked or fingers were wrapped.
It's quite a sad indictment on this authority, the fact that, in fact, I would say authority on the administration, that basically we always seem to be in a position where we make such a significant decision, right? And it's a block vote decision. It's not necessarily what we agree with. We walk into that chamber and we always try and put a vote forward in relation to our constituents. And one interesting thing about us is we have the ability to have a free vote. So, Jerry, you and I disagree on a subject matter. There is no whip system that exists where you, if you vote and don't vote the way I tell you.
I'm not like you, what, mate?
Theoretically. But again, the position here is when we don't have that system, we don't have that mechanism in place where that's what happens. So we've got the right to choose and basically back your constituents when we walk in that chamber. There is a lack of that within the other political parties, obviously. But when you look at that block vote, and the ACC is a perfect example of that. It's a perfect example. We've made this decision. We're not coming back to this decision, even though new evidence and new information is being presented. We're not coming back. That's it. We're sticking to our guns on this. Is that going to be detrimental in the long term? Because really, if you think about discourse within the chamber and debate within the chamber, there is the democratic mechanism now to have that debate and that discourse.
Greg, I think it's very important to point out when it comes to the individuals around this table. We're talking about we're unhappy with the way that was reversed.
Yep.
That we were all delighted that it was reversed.
Absolutely, yes, absolutely, 100%.
It's the way that the Labour administration, the Labour leader, has behaved instead of calling an emergency committee and getting it done. Coincidentally, the change was made on the day of Westminster by-election.
Yeah. That's a coincidence. It's a coincidence.
But you and I both sit on Policy and Strategy Committee, Greg, and tried to fight the original decision, and both spoke at length, probably for up to an hour between the two of us, to try and stop that in the first instance. Mm-hmm. But as we've said, the administration have their block vote and push that through.
Do we think now that Labour, as I said, is on the ascendancy in Scotland again, that we're going to see a distancing? Because ultimately, the administration's got the numbers. They have the numbers to be able to get anything they wish through. An independent support, rather than being the deal with the Tories and keeping these people in position.
I'm a really positive person, right? As I've pointed out many times, right? I am patiently waiting on the avalanche of money that is going to come the way.
We see these decisions overfilled.
I absolutely expect to see some meaningful attempts to flush local authorities with cash, to right some of the historical wrongs that have been done. And the ACs, the active and creative communities issue, I think, is one of them. Yeah. We've seen local services being starved of cash for many years, for reasons that we've discussed. That, you know, budgets are under huge pressure because of inflation. They're also pressured because each year we're shelling out £40 million, your PFI payments that will continue right through until 2035, 2036. So every year, your budgets, if you've got to pay 40 million this year, what I've been advised is next year that will rise by 3%. The following year it will rise by 3%. The following year it will rise by 3%. So we need to see a meaningful injection of cash from the Labour Party, who now control all the purse strings. Invest in our creative communities. Invest in the John Smith Pool. Invest in the Matt Busby. Invest in community centres. But don't just take El Presidente decisions out with the structures of the council because of political gain to be had, or make arbitrary decisions around the dates when they'll be re-looked at, because without doubt there is community facilities that perhaps don't pay the way, that perhaps shouldn't be open at the moment because they're not used as much as they should.
Do you think we've got a culture, and as I say, I'm not trying to be critical, I really am, I'm trying to remain unbiased, but ultimately that is the administration that's in charge of that authority. Do you think that we've kind of lost our way in this? Because this idea of delegated authority, how much responsibility does an elected councillor have for convenership, etc.? When you look at certain papers within North Lanarkshire, how many agenda items are decided? You were a convener before, Jerry, you were a convener. How many agenda items did you agree to? How many did you propose? What was the process of being a convener? Did you come in and say, by the way, officers, this is what this next meeting's going to be, I want to discuss X, Y and Z, and by the way, I can feel a campaign, or I know a campaign started, or here, in relation to a very prevalent matter, I might bring that up for discussion at this next committee meeting.
Given our own personal circumstances, those were very short periods.
I appreciate that it was over the blink of an eye. It was.
But in general.
And you've seen it.
I had one, I don't know if, I had one of the conveners meetings.
No, I didn't. I didn't have a conveners meeting prior to the committee sitting. But generally what happens is the convener will be presented by officers with papers.
That's exactly.
On
so they decide the agenda.
So unless we have a particularly headstrong convener, I don't see it. Or conveners within the council requesting specific changes to that agenda, then it appears to me that they're basically just managing, chairing the meetings and presenting the papers that come along from officers. That's my personal opinion.
It's the balance. What is the point of councillors, right? If you have limited remit in terms of committee papers, committee agendas, what is brought forward. We spoke a wee bit about the budget the last time round, and I don't want to go back and revisit that, but the same thing applies. People listening to this, perhaps it's the first time, perhaps they didn't listen last week when we spoke about budgets, but members of the public think that councillors will, draw up, they'll be powerful, they'll draw up a draft of services that need to be cut, that need to be retained. That's not how it happens. Officers will bring forward a paper with a suite, a menu of services that you can cut if you so wish.
Yeah.
And that's what happens. So your power, and power's the wrong word because it should all be done in partnership, but councils have very little power. Let's be honest. And I think
that's a misconception for the general public. I think the general public's under the impression that as soon as you become a councillor, you have this power, you can have this discussion with these officers, etc., etc. But the way the council works is because of that fact that officers are the ones that are designing the majority of things. They're designing the subjects that are going to be discussed at committees. They're designing the agenda when it goes to full council. Okay, the province has to approve it. But again, the point being to this is that it's kind of, you've been directed. And
without doubt.
Now, don't get me wrong, an officer would argue councillors that make the decisions, and absolutely, I would stand by that, that's fine. But again, we are a block vote to the administration. But point being is if it's a case that you have elected members who are not having the opportunity to have that discourse or that democratic process to have that discussion to provide representation for the constituents, what is the actual point of being an elected member?
It's a good question. I don't know that I have the answer for it, Greg. I'm going to be honest. I think in years gone by, there have been... Well, we've all heard the stories about what happened maybe 20, 30 years ago, where if you went at a house, you'd go and see your councillor, and your councillor would go and crack keys with the officers. In 2 weeks, and 2 weeks later, you got off at a house, right? That may well have happened, right? Now, it may well have been that in the past, councillors wielded a disproportionate amount of power over officers, and that might have been uncomfortable for officers. The pendulum, however,
is swung now.
I think the pendulum, from my perspective, as someone who's involved in it and who's looking at it now as a member of the public as well as an elected member, I think the balance is on the other side of it, and I'm a wee bit uncomfortable with it.
At time, but there's a couple of things that I want to kind of just quickly unpack on that. Are we getting to a stage, and again, we can talk about our profession because that is the job that we do. Are we seeing a culture of fear that exists within the elected members? And I can make a reference to the fact that as an elected member, the threat that's wielded over you all the time is Ethical Standards Commission complaint. And that seems to be the culture that exists, especially with our authority. I don't know how many times I've had it threatened. I don't know how many complaints have been taken against me because I ask difficult,
horrible questions. Indeed, as is your remit.
But when I was going to say, the role that I took on as an elected member when I was first elected in 2017 was a critical scrutiny role.
Yeah.
And really, in effect, scrutiny, whether I like to admit it or not, it's uncomfortable for everybody.
Yes.
Myself.
Yes.
But the point being is you have to ask those questions because that is effectively the job that you are remunerated to do. Now, remember, we're not employees.
Yeah.
But we're there to serve and be the voice of our constituents. Do you think there's a cultural shift within the authority due to that El Presidente style? Because it's got to come to somewhere. It's got to be endorsed.
Yeah.
Well, it's pretty clear that the administration, particularly, I would say in the past year, coincidentally, have had to deal with a lot more scrutiny from
they're seeing more campaigns.
Members, and they don't react to it.
No.
They're not used to it. I mean, if you go back several years, just several years ago, you know, Labour were in complete power and didn't have any scrutiny. They couldn't scrutinise themselves, barely any scrutiny. They had such a
free run
at it.
Yeah.
Aye, basically. So yeah, it's important as elected members that if you're not in power, you're not in administration, you're scrutinising everything that, yes, and this is no criticism specifically of any party or officers, but it's important as elected members. We were in part elected to scrutinise what the administration's doing and what officers are charged to do. And putting within papers.
Just to play devil's advocate here, because it can be perceived, right, that obviously we're talking about things that the general public have no clue about, absolutely none. And I thought that we're simplifying that. I really do. I hope we're explaining it well enough that they're going to be able, and that's not me being patronised upon the general public. It's such a convoluted process being an elected member, and the rules and the systems are all legal based to bamboozle you and make sure that you don't really understand it yourself. To put a fair and balanced approach to this, is it us? Are we problematic? If you're an elected member that takes his role of critical scrutiny seriously, are you the problem? Because ultimately you're not the one affecting change. Right? So that's what you're moaning. You're moaning about this.
I'm the problem. I'm supposed to be the problem.
Yeah.
You look at even the Audit Scotland, the paperwork that comes out. It kind of talks about the role of the councillor, talks about the role of the officer, talks about the relationships that exist between one and the other to make sure that the system operates as it is. But there is absolute recognition within that that elected members like us three and the other 74 members of North Lanarkshire Council have a critical scrutiny role to protect the public pound. It's in black and white, and that means that we will ask horrible questions where we don't readily see professional questions where we don't see an answer in committee papers. Now, that does not mean that I'm being discourteous or disrespectful or bringing the council into disrepute, or whether I'm making it or having a go at officers or anyone else. I have to satisfy myself that I understand that the public pound is being protected and that we are getting full value for money when we embark on projects or policy strategies, if you like. So that, it does mean that we're horrible at times, but professionally horrible. I don't think I've ever said anything to either any member or to any officer that I would, take back. Sitting here now, I just look at the culture that exists in the relationship between officers and elected members. And again, I'm not being disparaging. I'm certainly never ever. An officer's job is a hard enough job. Absolutely.
But the position for me here is I'm seeing a cultural shift. There's a culture that exists where elected members, if they try to question, if it's a case that you're looking for your own sort of understanding in certain subject matters, that we're finding a sort of, what would you say, a certain degree, a culture that exists of fear and intimidation, the Brexit Standards Commission complaints, but that has to come from somewhere. Because ultimately, there was a recent meeting, a full council, and perhaps, do you know what, Paul, why don't you explain it? You explain it to people what happened at that recent full council meeting.
Well, as you say, it's full council meeting. Recently, we had the leader of the council going on an absolute tirade. I won't go into the subject matter as it was a closed agenda item at a point in time. But the leader of the council, I won't repeat what he said specifically, but it was slaughtering.
Derogatory. That was deflammatory and derogatory.
Absolutely deflammatory comments. And it was probably timed whilst the cameras were off. Nobody,
cynic.
Nobody,
very cynic.
Nobody was.
Coincidence, Paul.
Absolutely.
Coincidence.
So coincidentally, his tirade was pointed in the direction of people around this table.
Who asked horrible questions?
Who scrutinise things.
Absolutely.
Strangely enough, and as I've already alluded to, they don't seem to.
They don't like.
They don't seem to enjoy.
Don't like being reminded of a coalition partnership either.
Given that tirade and the derogatory comments and the fact that
there was an interesting point at the end of that, and again, no disclosing any private or confidential information, but they had the leader of the council encouraging absolutely every officer in North Lanarkshire, a senior management level, to come forward with complaint.
Disgraceful.
To come forward with complaint
disgraceful conduct
against a certain political group. Now, my God, is that where we are? And such an abuse of power to encourage people to come forward with complaints rather than finding, if it is a case of a legitimate issue exists, than finding a resolution.
I'll be honest, I would fully expect to see a complaint go forward regarding that. I don't know if one's already been made, but I have never, in the 2 years that I've been in there, witnessed anything like that. It was,
and it comes back to that whole Presidente style of leadership. It's his dictation. He'll make the claims. He'll make the bold suggestions.
It's certainly not one that's conducive to partnership. What should Greg, if we're being honest. But there was another point that I wanted to make, just beyond that whole thing about an El Presidente style as well, and it goes back to the whole balance between officer and scrutiny role that we provide. There was a council meeting recently where we focused on a particular project, right? And it was a project that we had undertaken an awful lot of research into, right? And we carried out, so we asked lots of questions at committee about that to try and understand why we had chosen a particular route to go down rather than going down another route to get to the outcome and the award of a contract. And
it's evidently clear our relationship with office.
So, well, I
started exactly the same.
I just found this bizarre, right? So we focused on that and we asked questions on that. And then there was another contract that was brought to council, which on the face of it seemed to have been carried out to the letter, gold standard, if you like. And we didn't question that one because, as far as we were concerned, it looked as if it had been undertaken, perfectly well. And an officer of the council seemed to chastise those individuals who had focused.
I remember being chastised myself.
Who had focused on one area of scrutiny because they needed further understanding. Flip that round, Greg, right? Paul Damasio does that to an officer.
Oh, that's a standards commission. Right away, immediately.
So that whole thing about power, respect, partnership working, I think needs to be addressed.
We're not coming to a natural conclusion. I think that again we've spoken enough. I think, Paul, your mum must be away to bed now because we've just droned on. But listen, I really do hope that this is kind of educating people to a certain degree. It's giving them a better understanding how internal politics works and the authority, how things and decisions are being made. And on that note, hopefully we'll be back next time and we can unpack those contract decisions and we can unpack the certain aspects are key points that have been made. But I'm sure we'll have the opportunity to discuss a lot.
I think there's a lot of issues that will come on. That will,
we're only touching the surface at the moment.
There's some major issues in train at the moment that we would hope are going to be in the public sphere for us to discuss.
Sadly, it's very difficult for the public out there to find things out there about what the inner workings of the council, what goes on. So
we can
hopefully this.
What is the point, Paul? And on that note, thank you very much for joining us.